What's up, everybody? In the last video we left off at the completion of the frame. In this video I complete construction of this sofa table, so I hope you'll join me. I cut some scrap to use as rails for my shelves. I glued and tacked those into place using a scrap piece of pallet wood as a thickness guide. After that I selected my pieces of pallet wood. I wanted pieces that were relatively similar in thickness and were fairly straight and flat. I planed them down on one side, not to get them to the same thickness, but simply to make cutting them on the table saw a bit easier. Planing an edge or side isn't entirely necessary if you get nice flat boards. I cut them to random widths, making sure that 4 together would be at least as wide as the shelf opening. Lining 4 together, I drew lines across each at random intervals. This way I wouldn't confuse the board's order or orientation when reassembling. Also, these lines gave me a reference for my biscuit joiner. The biscuit joiner isn't a necessary tool for this project, but I never used one before, and I wanted to give it a try. With the panels glued and dried, I cut them down to fit the area in which they'd sit. In this case, one of my shelf's runners was just a bit wide in the frame and it stuck out into the opening. I determined the length of the cut with the shelf in place, then I eyeballed the thickness that needed to be sliced. I set the shelf panel over the table saw and raised the blade to cut out the material, thereby leaving the ends intact. Once they were fit, I sanded each one of them. I used 2x4s for the tabletop and I joined them with the same technique that I used for the shelf panels. Again, a joiner isn't necessary for this if you have true pieces, but if you don't, you might try to straighten them with a table saw in the absence of a joiner. After I planed the edges, I used a hand plane to get rid of the sharp corners. Once that was dried, I tried cutting the ends off on my table saw, but my table saw just wasn't sturdy enough to handle it, so I wound up hacking off the ends with my circular saw in frustration, and it turned out great. I cut some triangles from scrap 2x4s to secure to the corners of the frame. These aren't to stiffen the frame, but to secure the table top from beneath. With the shelf panels and tabletop glued up, I applied a coat of stain to each. The stain started off a bit dark, especially the shelf panels, as they were particularly porous and rough. So after a coat of clear spray paint, I sanded the surfaces down and then reapplied another layer of clear. To attach the top, I lay it face down on my workbench, flipped the frame upside down on top, then centered it up. With it centered, I pre-drilled some holes through the triangle braces and secured the top with 2.5-inch wood screws. Attaching the shelves was pretty straightforward due to the rails I installed earlier. I simply ran a bead of glue down the rail, laid the shelf in place, then clamped. And here's the result. I wouldn't say it was the easiest project that I've ever done, but certainly not the hardest by far. I learned a lot about mortise and tenon joinery, and I think the method of using a drill press is fairly sound. All in all, I'd say it was definitely worth the time and effort, given how great it looks in my living room. So I hope you enjoyed this video and my other videos. Be sure to check out part 1 if you haven't already. Please like, subscribe, and comment. And as always, thanks for playing along.